Hey!
Get it online, you know.
I'm so glad to see everybody here. We're still expecting Glenna from Johnson City, so when she comes, I'm sure we will welcome her in when she gets here, but we're going to get started. So I'm so glad that everyone is here. For those who are new to being clerks, which I think there's a couple, or appointed clerks of the day, because I know we have a couple of those. I am Becky Kindig. I'm an associate pastor here, but I'm the co-stated clerk for Susquehanna Valley Presbytery. And this is my co-clerk, Chris Berger. He is an elder here at Binghamton United, and also the co-clerk of the Presbytery along with me.
And actually, I have been a clerk of session years
He
ago.
has been in your position.
And you managed to get out of the chair.
Anytime you like our chair, we're happy to trade. So we're so excited that you're here, and we are also very excited for David Staniunas to join us today. He is from the Presbyterian Historical Society in Philadelphia, and he's an archivist there. And he knows all kinds of things about what we need to do with our minutes and keeping of historical documents, and he is going to share his knowledge with us. All right, well, I'm going to turn it over to David, and he can get started, and I will get out of the way.
Great. Sweet. Whoops. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is David Staniunas. I'm records archivist at the Presbyterian Historical Society. I've been in that role since 2011. Why am I the person who's talking to you today? I am PHS's accessioner, so that means that every new archival collection that comes in the building, I see it first. I do the initial description, get it in the database, get it on the shelf, get it into these spiffy, acid-free boxes. And that means that I do a lot of talking to PCUSA congregations and mid-councils, mostly to convince them to do things a little bit better so that when I see their stuff, it's not as hard for me to deal with. So my contributions to you are entirely in my own self-interest. This is totally selfish appeal. No, I'm really grateful to Becky for inviting PHS out here. Great. So I'm going to talk. I'm going to talk about us. I'm going to talk about PHS and what we do for congregations. I'm going to talk about the challenges that congregations face in navigating, handling their historic records. Much of this is going to be me hiding behind a PowerPoint. The hiding is much more effective on Zoom. It's still very public. So one of the chief questions that we still get 20 years after, more than 40 years after reunion and more than 20 years after we finally merged both offices, is which historical society are you? Are you the one in Montreat? We are not. We're the Presbyterian Historical Society. We're organized in 1852. We're in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We have more than 38,000 cubic feet of original historic material, going back to the very first Presbyterian meeting on this continent in 1706, held by Francis McKemey and like 6 other dudes in Philadelphia, which is why we're there. We grow annually by about 500 cubic feet a year. The largest portion of that is records of congregations, both dissolved and active. 10 years ago or so, about 3/4 of our intake was national agency bureaucracy records. About 250 cubic feet of paper coming in from Louisville every single year. That has transformed. The national agencies create records born digitally, and we preserve them born digitally. And so instead of 200 feet of paper every year, we get about 1/3 of a terabyte of people's emails and desktops. The majority of stuff that we get comes from congregations. 10 years ago, we would get like 90+% of that from dissolved churches. Nowadays, it's a lot closer to like 60-40. And that's owing to the fact that we can provide way better access to congregations' records now than we could 10, 15 years ago. 10, 15 years ago, if you had a question about records that you had on deposit with us, You can either get us to do research for you or get us to shoot microfilm of your records. And now that we can provide PDF versions of your stuff, people trust us much more. Folks in Afton are entrusting us with stuff because they already have a digital version of their content, and so on.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely, sure.
If we
got
have
plenty of
a
time.
microfilm, can we have it switched to digital?
Yeah, we farm out microfilm digitization. So we use a vendor to do it. It costs us about $80 a reel. But you're welcome to use any vendor that you want to turn your microfilm into PDF documents. There's a couple on the East Coast. Crowley, Crowley does it. There's a handful of others. If you look up microfilm digitization, you can find out more. So I was blabbing a lot about like art ingest because that's something I'm obsessed with. But the reason why we have no trouble documenting Presbyterianism is that keeping records is part of your theological framework and part of your polity, right? What's on the screen is a version of the very first, the 1789 Book of Order with chapter 20 of Clerks. Every judicatory shall choose a clerk. It's got that funky ancient F-looking S, right? Shall choose a clerk to record their transactions. Whole continuance shall be during pleasure. It shall, whose continuance? Goodness, gosh. It shall be the duty of the clerk, besides recording the transactions, to preserve them carefully and to grant extracts from them. And that text has basically been unchanged over the last about 250 years. If you look at G30101, G30104, G30107, it says clerks have to record faithfully and produce extracts. I joke with folks that Presbyterians are people of the book, and I mean a couple of books. The Book of Order, Bible, Book of Confessions, and Robert's Rules Revised 3rd edition. Those are like your guiding texts. And so that means that there's no shortage of historic documentation of Presbyterians in the United States of America. So the first question that people call us up with is they've opened up an old history room or your old library or a basement or a secret closet, and they just find things like unsorted matter, and they go, I don't know where to begin. And so the first thing that you have to do is to do what archivists call appraisal and selection. What's on the screen is a whole body of content that came to us about 2013. I got a phone call from a lady in Texas somewhere who said, hey, we are a church that's 60 years old, and we're closing this year, and we are sending you the contents of the church office. And I said, please, ma'am, no, you're not. Said, too late, it's already on Greyhound. And they used Greyhound freight. They shipped us 1,300 pounds of material. And so my job was to tease apart all of the junk from the good stuff. What you've got on the screen are like 100 copies of the same like print newsletter, paid bills, and multiple copies of the church directory, and just like all kinds of paper that is not as significant as other kinds of paper. So how do you like begin to chop away at something like that? I tell people like the first body that you want to pull out of the wreckage are your vital records, and you've got them right in front of you actually, session minutes and registers. Those are the texts like without which your organization can't be said to have ever existed, right? They are provided for in the Book of Order. You have to keep session minutes, you have to keep registers, including in a certain way. And I've forgotten what the requirements are, but that's why you're clerks and I'm not. I am a clerk, actually. I'm an assistant stated clerk at Peace USA. I'm just not trained up like you guys are. So we treat as permanent any minutes of any council of the church. So your session, your trustees, your deacons, women's groups, youth groups, the Old Ladies Aid Society, the Women's Home and Foreign Missionary Society, the Young People's Society for Christian Endeavor, if they ever kept narrative minutes, we think of them as being of permanent value. Registers document, church membership and are extremely useful and extremely well loved by genealogists, right? So registers fulfill like a social function for people at large too. Your session minutes and registers are going to tend to be, despite what I'm looking at here, they're going to tend to be a pretty small and information-dense batch of records. If you're a church that's like 150 years old, maybe peaked at 150 members, you're probably going to have like a box or maybe 2 boxes of session minutes and registers. That varies because some people are more prolix than others, and it varies because we get much better in the 20th century about like we can produce just more stuff in the 20th century than our ancestors did. They're going to tend to be a very small amount of stuff. The second kind of like larger category of material that we also think of as being of permanent value are commemorative records. And so these are the kinds of things that document the social life of the church outside of the session. They can be photographs, photograph albums, newsletters, published church histories. These are all the kinds of things that add flesh to the bones of session minutes. What's on the screen is a photo of a proud Girl Scout and her little brother from Bay Ridge United Church. I forget what county it's in. I think it's on Long Island.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody. The connectional nature of the church, ladies and gentlemen. Woo! Bay Ridge United was a joint PCUSA RCA church that recently dissolved. We got a ton of their stuff. And the only evidence that they had a Girl Scout group was a fistful of Kodachrome prints from the 1960s, including this one. So there's no minutes of their Girl Scout group, but this is the proof that they had that presence in their neighborhood. That's why it's worth keeping. I kind of briefly mentioned like the social power of your archives, but there are a couple of stories that I like to tell about why congregations' records are not just good for you inside your congregation, but are good for society. The records that you keep have the capacity to remind Presbyterians of the promises that you've made and to see whether you've matched up to the promises you've made society. What's on the screen is a children's pageant from Easter in the 1920s. It's the Bohemian Brethren Church of Omaha, Nebraska. I have this on the screen because over the course of the 20th century, and many of you probably know this, there were language-based presbyteries all throughout the country. We had a Welsh synod, so we had 2 Welsh presbyteries in Pennsylvania up until about 1950. There were people who came from the Hungarian Reformed Church. There were Bohemian Presbyterians, so people who spoke Czech, and they all gathered in language-based presbyteries. And sort of slowly over the course of the 20th century, and we're really talking about the Northern Church gradually kind of provided seats at the table for people who are non-English speakers. And I think that passage through history is worth thinking about and remembering. The other story that I like to tell about the social value of keeping your minutes and registers actually comes from First African Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia. This was the first Presbyterian church of freed blacks in the country, organized in 1807. Their first church register is, I don't know, out there in the wind somewhere. Nobody knows where it's at. About 8 or 10 years ago, they came to us to do research because we house what remains of their original records. And we house the records of every other Philadelphia church in the early 19th century. And so they went to every other church in Philadelphia for the time period 1807 to 1847, when the, at the time called the Second Colored Church, opened up, and found every entry in every white church's register that said dismissed to colored church. And they went, okay, well, there was only one in the Presbyterian tradition, so that's a member of our church. And so they constructed their original membership through entries in the registers of everybody else around it, kind of like building it out of negative space. That's one of the most powerful depictions of like the social value of the stuff that you do that I can possibly think of. Sooner or later, your records are going to be of interest to everyone around you, not just your own church. Okay, so we've talked a little bit, and I've proselytized a little bit. I'm going to proselytize a lot more. Get ready. We've talked a little bit about a couple of categories of records. The first is your vital records, minutes, registers. There's going to be a small amount. Look for them first. Commemorative records are going to be a bigger bucket. You can look for them second after you've found the vital records. And the biggest possible bucket, the room-sized bucket for church records, are materials of temporary value, which just record ordinary business transactions and can be records managed out, shredded away, thrown from the windows. We have an extensive records retention schedule on our website. I'm going to do a couple of different show and tell things, but one of them is I'm going to bop around on our website a little so you can see what that's like. The majority of business transaction stuff that you have the majority of that stuff is shreddable after 7 years. So accounts receivable, accounts payable, bank statements, cash deposits, even ancient ledgers that record pledges. Those are temporary financial records and can be records managed out too. I mentioned shredding. So, David, wait, you're saying I should use paper for permanent records? Yes, and. Yes, I am kind of saying that, and there are a couple of reasons why. So, it is absolutely the case that everything that you create now starts out on a computer, right? You're either in a Word document or a Google Drive document or something. And when you need to transmit that text to people, like at Session Minutes Review, there are a lot of presbyteries that do Session Minutes Review by just transferring over a Word document or a PDF document so that everybody can read that online. That is entirely possible and viable. It is also the case that for a long time we have been living in a hybrid digital and paper preservation environment. Paper has qualities that born digital texts do not have. One of them is it's very easy to carry diplomatic traces on paper. What I mean by diplomatic traces is proofs of authenticity. That comes from the 18th century science diplomatics, which is the study of authentic texts. What's on the screen is another piece of minutes from another Nebraska church, actually, Presbyterian Niobrara. Can anybody see on the page, if you can see it well at all, what you think are proofs of that text's authenticity?
Signatures.
We got signatures.
Date.
We have a date
Place.
and a stamp. We have place names. This is all fantastic. If I had a bigger image of that, there would also be pagination, right? Sometimes you have pagination and the end of the page is short and you draw a big X to mark out like nothing can be added here, right? So that unscrupulous archivists years later can't like type into the record, your church property was deeded to David Staniunas' dad, right? So you have control over the text in a way that you have to have a whole different infrastructure for if you're going to preserve a digital text. What were we getting to? Oh yeah. So another reason why paper has been good, and a lot of things have changed honestly in the last 10 10, 15 years, I think that the field of archives really struggled in the era before cloud computing, just as a metaphor. Like in the era before widely distributed internet-based storage, when all of our storage was based on fragile media, like magnetic media or optical media, we really struggled with the idea of a permanent digital landscape. And that's becoming like way more comfortable. In the 1990s, it was a desperate struggle. And one of the things that we deal with in trying to preserve born digital texts is the introduction of technical dependencies, right? I rely on paper as good for the very long term because there's minimal technical dependencies. If you have a light source and you're capable of reading the language in front of you, you can read it. If you wanted to read that same language off of a floppy disk, you have a hardware dependency, which is the obsolete carrier, floppy disks. You may have a software dependency. You may have obsolete software formats. What's on the screen is the floppy, and then a screen grab of all of the contents of the floppy disk, which are in a PWP file format, which is an ancient proprietary desktop publishing format. And there's one page per document there. It's a disaster. This was a church from St. Louis. I went to Giddings Lovejoy Presbytery and picked up a bunch of stuff from them a few years back. And this church had paper minutes and registers going back to like the 1870s all the way through about 2010. Except in the 1990s, for a portion there, their clerk kept everything on floppy disks and would slot the floppies into plastic sleeves inside the minute book. So it went paper minutes, floppy disks and nothing, and then paper minutes again. And so there's effectively a gap in the record because some of those floppies I could read, some I couldn't read. Some of the actual files, Microsoft Word is incredibly backwards compatible now, and it can read a whole bunch of stuff, but it can't read everything. So there's basically a gap for that church in the 1990s because people wanted to be very forward-thinking instead of very backward-thinking. Okay, so I talked about the digital preservation landscape and the need for like a whole architecture in order to maintain it. And so I'm going to talk very briefly about how we maintain our own digital architecture. So who's on the screen? That's my colleague, Allison, who's a digital collections archivist. That's her when she was one rank lower and mostly did scanning. So we have public-facing digital archives that we call Pearl. It's digital.history.peaceusa.org. That's where we put material that we have digitized out of our own collections that we own outright. There are a lot of things that we hold on deposit, and we tend not to put stuff that we hold on deposit out online. So again, this is probably very difficult to see, but I'm going to navigate you guys around the website too. What's on the screen is the web interface. What is on the right side is just a screen grab of kind of the back end of the web interface. So you can see that like we have, let's see, Drupal as the web content management system. Fedora is the digital repository. Fedora is a piece of software that takes one digital object like a TIFF image or a PDF file or a WAV audio file, generates derivatives of it that can be viewed on the web, maintains checksums and compares checksums across time, so it does fixity checks to make sure that none of the bits and bytes have flipped over and become corrupted, and it automates regeneration of the old object based on a prior capture. It does all of this automatically. It is expensive to maintain. We have about 350,000 digital objects online. There's about 11 terabytes of data in there. We are about to do like a regeneration of the system to get out of Drupal 7. That's going to cost us $125,000, and there's like a 5-figure maintenance fee every single year just to maintain what's really a very, kind of a modest amount of material. It's about the size of like a small research university's kind of material. And it's a serious endeavor. One thing, so I mentioned the church in St. Louis that struggled to maintain its minutes over the long term because they opted for like a new preservation technology that failed. And so I want to talk about some of the places where that might happen again. And that might be happening with church registers and church membership management systems. These do, to me, they do two different things. A register captures vital information. It captures, the role of elders, the role of ministers, membership roll, arranges everybody chronologically, has baptisms, marriages, and deaths. The classic 19th century church register is a really information-dense text, right? If you scanned, like you did on the screen, if you scan 2 pages of a church register, you will end up with entries for you could end up with entries for 40 people, if it's one side and there's baptisms. That kind of density changes if you use different kinds of technology. I'm going to skip to this technology. So that's a church register using index cards. This is from a big, I don't know if it's 4th in Chicago, it might be 4th Chicago, which is still a relatively large church, but in the 19th century, early 20th century was massive. And they had a challenge keeping their church register because they had thousands of people. And they needed a technology that was extensible infinitely. And an index card system is extensible infinitely. If you get a new person, you write a new card. If that person does something new, you write a card about that. And that means that information about one person is scattered throughout a really vast collection. When they joined, when they left, when they rejoined, when they got baptized, when they got married. So you can have 8 or 9 different entries for an individual scattered all over the place. From my perspective in the future, it's really difficult for us to do anything with an index card register. Because when you scan it, you end up with 1 image per card. And that information ends up spread, just as it is in the index cards, across thousands of entries instead of just a couple of hundred pages. But this is, again, me proselytizing, but not every innovation in office technology is good for, the 100-year period, good for the historic record. Church membership management systems are probably closer to an index card system than they are to the classic church register. What's on the screen is a screenshot from Servant Keeper. Yes, it's SK. So this is, I forget, Servant Keeper 5 or 6 or something. And there's all kinds of information embedded in a member's profile that does not need to be kept forever, right? You have people's headshots, phone numbers, email addresses, social security numbers, records of giving, all kinds of personally identifiable information that is really good for the present moment, right? It's great for being able to contact everybody who hasn't given in the last year, right? It's great to run reports and send mass emails with, but it's not something that needs to be kept for the next 100 years. And in fact, poses a little bit of a liability problem because of the amount of personally identifiable information that's embedded in these systems. So my message to people usually is, think of your church membership management software as the present day, this is a tool that you use in the present day to do like daily business of church membership management. And think again about keeping permanent vital records in a church register. Even if that document is a born digital text, even if it is like a spreadsheet that you export from Servant Keeper or you export from your church membership management software, even if it's that, have a separate document that does not contain all of the personally identifiable information and stuff. Gotcha. Before I proselytize more, I want to make sure that we have, are there questions that have popped up in your mind right now? I want to make sure that there's plenty of time for that. Yeah.
I wanted to know about video tapes, like the old VHS tapes of worship services, and also like we have the little cassette tapes of recorded choir music or different things.
Yeah. For our purposes, yeah, we think of audio and video recordings as, in places, being of permanent value. We think of them as commemorative records, just like photos, photo albums, newsletters. The challenge that is faced is the bulk of stuff that some people have, right? There are churches that have like an audio cassette recording of every single sermon that has ever. So like I run it, First Dallas and First Tulsa both have like complete, going back 40 years. So weekly sermons for 40 years is 2,000 audio cassettes. You know what I mean? And the challenge for individual churches is how much of that can you realistically maintain, right? And so going back to the very first slide, I think the task for churches who want to do that is appraisal. You need to be able to select out the stuff that you think is just the coolest and the best, right? And so I recommend to people, like, look, if you have a recording of your worship from like the Sunday after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, right? The Sunday after the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. Like if there's moments in history that are majorly significant, and you think your pastor was addressing them, maybe that's not always the case, you want to capture those. You want to capture like a selection of Christmases and Easters. In the Black church homecoming, there's like an anniversary for like whenever the church was founded, and there's like a homecoming Sunday. That's very significant for folks. There may be the installation of a pastor, church mortgage burning, cornerstone laying. So think of significant events in the life of the church. Get those tapes.
And how do you preserve those? Do you have
you digitize them. The plastic era, era of tape. The era of tape is longer than we thought it was going to be. I've had success playing. Digitization of audio cassettes gets iffy around like 1970. So the very earliest audio cassettes, you're going to likely have very poor playback. But almost anything from the 90s to the present is going to be playable. There are, if you don't want to learn how to do it yourself, there are plenty of places that will do that for you. Same way with VHS tapes. In our shop, we do open reel tape, audio cassettes, VHS. My beta deck is broken. DV cam, vinyl LPs, a couple of other formats we can do in-house. Most broadcast videotape like U-matic or 1-inch quad, we ship out.
So do you have grants that would do that for us? Or is that our responsibility to digitize it?
Yeah, we do not offer cash grants, kind of period.
Okay.
And I'm going to talk more about the services that we do offer, but cash grants is not one of them. Cool. I love talking about AV stuff because in addition to all of the other stuff that I do, I'm like the de facto audiovisual guy in the shop.
I noticed I have a reel, still do,
Cool.
and have tapes associated with it. I've noticed a kind of a bleeding. I refer to it as bleeding, but basically, I think it's a signal from the piece of tape that was next to it. As it reels on.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it kind of distorts.
There's a lot of things that can go on for sure. Very often open reel tapes are recorded on either side, right? So there's two different tracks, and the playback head can pick up the other track. So it'll sound like there's a low voice running backwards, along with the high pitch or the high volume voice running forwards. Very cool stuff.
Scott's downstairs, so if that's Glenna, he'll
Cool.
correct.
How are we doing for time, Becky?
I think we're great.
Great. Okay. Cool. There's more proselytization. How can PHS help me? The first thing that we do for congregations is we bring in original records on deposit. That's just a little shot of the archives. Our storage space is underground. It's about 3/4 the length of a city block in Philadelphia. Has 2.5 foot thick concrete walls. Was originally completed in 1977. Has its own dedicated HVAC unit. Most recent modernization was 2019. So we keep it 65 degrees and 50% relative humidity all year round in there. Like I said earlier, we do about 500 cubic feet of ingest every year. And as of this writing, I have about 1,700 feet available in there. Nevertheless, please consider if you have minutes and registers that you do not frequently refer to, you can place them on deposit with us. One of the other things that we're going to do today is you're going to see me turn all of this into like a reasonable archival collection, and we're going to do that live.
Those are the records from Emmanuel that has just closed. So that is what came to me from the administrative commission.
Yeah.
This was the stuff that they're like, we know some of this is good, but we don't know about others.
Yeah.
So I was going to go through it, and David said, "Let me help you." So I
Yeah,
was like,
it's
"Thank
a
you."
great, it's like a cooking show. You see all of the parts go their different ways. So what happens when your records come here is they get described to the item level, session minutes 1980-2000, session minutes 1960-1980. Those descriptions go up online. Anybody in the world can go and see the description. Original records of congregations and mid-councils are open to the general public for anything that is more than 50 years old. So we have a 50-year embargo, partly to preserve the privacy of church members in the registers, partly to preserve the sanctity of deliberations, right? The idea that not everything that gets said in session needs to be public immediately, to allow like freedom of thought inside of session meetings. Please do.
Question. When you say deposit, is this just going to be physically deposited and not digitized?
Yeah, so this is an awesome question. Yes, I mean physically placed online. Not everything that is deposited is digitized. In fact, very little is. We shoot about 100,000 pages of text a year. What's on the shelf is about 210 million pages of text. Deposit is a free service. You've paid for it by paying your per capita. So thank you for paying your per capita. I'm a per capita employee. It keeps food on the table. Digitization, the other thing that we offer to congregations. Look at that. Digitization is a paid service. So we charge 70 cents per page. We shoot at 600 pixels per inch at 24-bit color depth. We deliver one PDF document per volume of minutes or registers. So there's a one-to-one relationship between the thing you have and the digital representation of it. Again, we do many jobs for congregations a year, but we shoot about 100,000 pages of text every single year. We apply optical character recognition to any piece of text that is typewritten, so that when you get your PDF, you can Control F to just search the whole text. Which is the big advantage over trying to do research into paper texts. What else is going on at PHS? Cool things are going on at PHS. Over the last 5 years, I think that we have been called upon to respond to the church directly in more active ways. One of the first things that I got to participate in 5 years ago was our response to the church in Puerto Rico following Hurricane Maria. We got basically instructed by our governing body, you have to go do something in Puerto Rico. And so me and another staffer went to San Juan Presbytery. We picked up records from Hugh O'Neill Memorial Church in San Juan, which is like right by the Casa Azul, the governor's house, and had been damaged in the hurricane, and their fellowship hall had holes in the roof still, was still taking on water, and that's where all of their records were, basically under an open roof. We got their records back to Philadelphia. We also embarked on work to digitize material from Puerto Rico that we already had in-house. So what's on the screen is a children's group, photos taken by the Board of National Missions. I think it's at Central in Mayaguez. I think it's Central Church Mayaguez, which is a city on the west coast of Puerto Rico. In 2020, between March and June, everybody in PHS was out of PHS. We were all forced to work from home. And at the same period, May 31st is when the kind of like May 27th, 31st is when the nationwide protests following the murder of George Floyd happened. And we again were called upon to respond. I took, over the course of like the next year, I spent time looking at publicly accessible church Facebook and YouTube and other social media pages to find places where Presbyterian churches had responded to the renascent Black Lives Matter movement. Excuse me. And we eventually built what we called the Black Lives Matter video collection. It's a collection of videos spanning like 2014 to 2021. What's on the screen up on the top left is a news broadcast. Don't ask me how I got that. It's a secret. You're not supposed to do it. You have to hack into their content management system to like download the video. But that's a video from Springfield, Massachusetts, where the Martin Luther King Community Presbyterian Church had been victimized by arson over winter. On the right is a video from one pastor's like Instagram reel of just walking around Minneapolis shortly after the events. And then on the bottom left is Pentecost at First Church, Ferguson, Missouri, where the pastor of a majority white congregation, very plainly appeals for peace. That's a really interesting collection. I encourage you to take a look. Hand in hand with that, over the course of like the last 6 years, we've been dedicating staff time and money to documenting Black Presbyterianism through a fund that's called the African American Leaders in Congregations Initiative. We've been able to offer free imaging for historically Black congregations. Basically, if there's a church that's inside the national agencies publish a document that's like the African American and African Diaspora Churches Directory. If you're in that document, you're eligible. Over the course of, since 2020, we've done free imaging for about 40 Black churches, which is about 10% of the whole registry. So we have a ways to go. One of the other things that, do I want that? I want the other one. There we go. One of the other things funded by that initiative was our efforts to digitize the entire personal papers of Katie Geneva Cannon. Dr. Cannon, obviously you know this, was the first black woman ordained in the Presbyterian Church in 1974 in the old Presbytery of Catawba. And I first got in touch with Katie in 2017 when I digitized an oral history of hers from back in 1987 that she had put restrictions on that I wanted her to lift. And she said, absolutely. They say that every 10 years, every cell in your body becomes a new cell. So I've been a different person 3 times. I have no idea why I had that restricted. Like, it was just her mind. And I worked for a couple of years with the pretty shortly thereafter. We were supposed to meet up at General Assembly in 2018, and she died in April of 18. And I kept talking with her family about what they wanted to do with her personal papers, and in 2020, they made their decision. They took a third of her stuff to Union Presbyterian in Richmond, a third of her stuff to Union in New York, and the other third, I think we have the biggest third, gave that biggest third to us. And so we had to communicate with the other seminaries, look, we have an ambition to digitize everything that's here. And we had to do proof of concept. They were unwilling to temporarily transfer stuff to us until we had shown them what it would be like. But I got Union Richmond to do it first, and that convinced Union in New York. The whole process took 2 years to image. We shot 15,000 pages of Katie's sermons, essays, writings, her artwork. She liked to draw, and she liked to do watercolor. I have no idea.
Is that background hers?
Yeah. And there's scores of hours of audio and video too. All of that is online now, also in our digital collections. And the other intentionally funded collection we have is to document the history of LGBTQ Presbyterians over the 40-year struggle for ordination equality and marriage equality. That initiative, similar to AALC, is just named after Pam Byers, longtime activist in the Covenant Network. The most recent thing is actually published in our newsletter. We are now the repository of More Light Presbyterians records. They were originally housed at Rutgers University. They were deposited there in the early 2000s because there was a More Light activist who worked for Rutgers. And when he kind of retired from that activity, he put his stuff into his workplace's archives. Kind of also because, we're the archives of the institutional church. And that was a period where, you had an activist organization butting heads with the institutional church. We couldn't be trusted with their stuff. It had their membership directories and their records of giving. You have the list of every activist. It would be like Democratic Socialists of America depositing stuff with the National Archives alongside the FBI. It wouldn't make any sense. And so after a lot of negotiation, we brought in 48 cubic feet of More Light's records. It had never been processed before, even though it had been sitting around for 35 years because Rutgers didn't care about it the way that we care. I'm just throwing them right under the bus. And within a couple of months, we had a finding aid up and we have folder level control over all of the stuff. You can read about it there. That is the lion's share of everything that's going on at PHS. Thank you for this long advertorial for my job. You've already got all of my propaganda, you've got my business cards, and I wanted to make sure that we had time for more questions, and then maybe a quick break to grab water, and then I could do the cooking show half.
I have another question.
Sure, go ahead.
You said that it's important to preserve the social life of the church, and now our social life is on Facebook.
Yeah.
So
what are you gonna do?
yeah, do we need to do anything?
I truly don't know the answer for that. It used to be easier 10 years ago. There were web scrapers that actually worked well on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram feeds. And Meta has kind of like reduced the way that they allow different scripts to interact with those feeds. So I like truthfully don't know what to do with your feeds.
The only thing I could think of is it would have somebody just take screenshots of the history, you know?
I mean, 10 years ago, I would have, 10 years ago, I would have said, like, try saving things via the Internet Archives tools, archive it, which still does well with, like, you know, HTML5, like, just basic websites, they still do well, but there are different ways to, you can still download a Twitter archive. I've never been able to successfully do it, honestly. I think I'm generating like zip, they just give you a big zip file that's supposed to just open up in a web browser. But if the zip file's too big, the downloads can get corrupted. It's like, I don't know what you should do. I would recommend
let us know
it.
when you figure it out.
I know. 10 years ago, we had Web Recorder, which got bought by a company and transformed, and now it's a subscription service, and it doesn't work the same way as it did. There used to be like a more open internet, and we have a less open internet than we had 10 years ago. I would say kind of the same thing that I said about audio cassettes and VHSs. Make sure if you post like digital video to whatever your platforms are, of like a Christmas service or like something of significance, make sure that you have an offline version. Just have a folder in whatever your preferred digital storage is that's like video, and you know, give things meaningful titles, add a date either in like the metadata of the file or in just the file name, because dates change based on when a file gets moved from one place to another, and somebody who's not you might not know, like, okay, is this 2004, is it 2014? It's difficult to tell visually. We have a lot more information on our website than we did before about maintaining your own digital footprint in your church. So maintaining those commemorative records digitally. We have information for mid-councils about the stuff that they can keep digitally, and so on. But that is really a fantastic question.
Sounds like to me that it would be interesting in churches if they could afford it or do something voluntarily, have a church historian whose job would be to preserve, maintain.
Once upon a time.
We do have a historian, but
They're not digitally
no, but it's all digital.
Yeah,
It's all
okay,
on
gotcha,
Facebook.
Yeah, they just push stuff out to Facebook.
Yeah.
Yes, Mom.
I heard what you said. You bring these to your facility, but you don't digitalize them right away?
Not as a matter of course, no.
So they just sit like they are right now in the basement of the church.
They sit right
but
there.
in a protected, much better place.
Hopefully better. I think what you're getting at is how accessible is this stuff?
Exactly.
Yeah. So anything that you have on deposit, I guess first of all, is material that we do not own. You continue to own it. That's a difference between us and putting stuff in like a university library or the public library downtown. They will make you sign a deed of gift, which is a gift to that institution, which limits your access. If you have a research need, like somebody says, I was baptized in your church, I'm getting married in the Catholic Church, they need proof of baptism, you just refer them to us. We do baptismal attestations for living persons for free. We field genealogical requests. So like anybody who says, my Mima and Papa are both buried in the churchyard, do you have any proof? You can say, you can go directly to the reference desk at PHS. We field about 2,000 questions a year remotely. We have a reading room where anybody in the general public can come and look at stuff. And then if you have, like, say you undertake a revised church history, right, and you need to, like, go back and read your session minutes, then if you have very discrete requests, you just ask us and we do the research. If you have a long-term request, we can return the volumes to you to go and read them, just with a letter from the clerk of session.
Could you talk about visiting the facility?
Absolutely.
What's available when we
Yeah,
get there?
we're open. So our research hours are Tuesday through Friday, 9 o'clock to 4 o'clock. There, you can schedule. You know what would be better? Hold up. I'm trying to just read what's on the website
Is it
in my
this
mind.
brochure?
Well,
There's going to be information in that brochure for sure.
Well, I guess I wanted an overview of, do you have galleries? Do you have displays?
What other stuff is there to look at? Yeah, we have
Yeah.
public galleries on the first floor and also the basement. In fact, right now we have a slightly overgrown display on the first floor, which is actually images from the religious news service. So in addition to being the National Archives of the PCUSA, we're also the archives of the National Council of Churches, World Council of Churches U.S. Division, and a couple of other like ecumenical organizations. Basically, in the 1970s, if you had an office in 475 Riverside Drive in New York City, the God Box, if you had an office in the God Box, we were your archives. And so we're also the archives of Religious News Service, which was like the AP of American religion, running from, they still run, but we have their photo morgue from 1948, earlier, 44 to 1984. And we recently, we are still in the process of a National Endowment for the Humanities grant to image about 22,000 photo files, and a file can contain multiple photographs. Out of that morgue. And so the current exhibit is all stuff from the civil rights era in Religious News Service. We're in downtown Philadelphia at 5th and Lombard. I just made this drive, so book about 3.5 hours from Binghamton to Philadelphia, down the Blue Route. And we have off-street parking, which is rare in Center City, Philadelphia, so you can just roll right in.
It's free.
And it's free. You can roll right in. If you want to take Amtrak, you go to 30th Street Station and then get on the L and go to 5th Street.
So I see the Old Pine Street Presbyterian Church is there in the cemetery.
Yeah, Old Pine
is
is...
historical.
Yeah, Old Pine is... officially 3rd Scots and Mariners. They were schlorbed together in the 1960s. So they're not the oldest, but they are Revolutionary War era Philadelphia congregation, and there are patriots buried in the graveyard. I think there are also privateers. I think there's a couple of pirates in the graveyard as well, which is super cool. So yeah, there are backyard neighbors.
Yeah.
And some of our other neighbors up the block, Mother Bethel AME, so Mother Bethel African Methodist Episcopal, which is the mother church of the entire denomination, is up the block from us. And we actually are also the archives of AME, of that one congregation anyway.
Cool.
So do you do group tours? Like if we had a group of clerks from our presbytery
Yeah.
that all came together, would you give us a tour?
Absolutely.
Very cool.
Yeah,
We
send
might
us an-
have to organize something
Yeah,
like that.
send us an email and we'll get you staffed up appropriately and we'll walk you around. Yeah.
Or if I come by myself. My
You're-
son lives right down there.
Come on by.
No wonder you go there.
There it is.
Is there a fee for storage?
No, depositing stuff is totally free. The only thing we charge for is digitization.
So you said that the records 50 years and older are accessible to the public,
Yes.
but if they're not digitized, they would have to come and physically
Yes.
look at those.
Yes. If they're older than 50 years, general public folk can request digitization.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
And then The majority of the things that we digitize for congregations, we do not push out to the public, usually because the jobs that we're doing are close to contemporary. And so we have a whole, I guess the third thing we do for congregations, we do deposit, we do digitization, and then we do long-term dark storage of the stuff that we digitize. We've got a big chunk of Microsoft Azure that has about 70 terabytes of both born digital and digitized content. So we have public-facing, about 11 terabytes, and dark, about 70. Yes?
Were you gonna run through a little bit of orientation to your website?
Yeah, I can roll through a couple of things, yeah. Especially since I was trying to describe things that are just sitting online.
Yeah. Yep.
This is us, history.pcusa.org. Services. So you can, we ask folks to plan their visit. And then we have a form if people ask for a baptismal attestation. And then we ask people who want a baptismal attestation to just say that they are who they say they are and sign a form. I wanted to show you.
Do they have to be related?
So attestations are for the living people themselves. So those people themselves have to ask.
Oh, okay.
Otherwise, if they're deceased, it's a genealogical request.
So,
Right.
okay, okay.
And so this is our digital collections, digital.history.pcusa.org. That is the Katie collection. Yes, I'm gonna put it in grid. Yep. There's some tapes. That's not just the image of the tape, it is also the audio.
That's cool.
Yeah. So that kind of thing. Other stuff. Do you wanna? Yes. So if you're coming individually and you want to do stuff in the reading room, like to actually do research, we ask you to schedule an appointment in advance. And there's a big old bunch of links about that. And then I mentioned our records retention schedule. You can just go to depositing records, ownership, depositing. We have instructions if people are also, we are also available to bring in born digital versions of your minutes. So if you're keeping minutes and saving them to PDF, we can bring them in, one volume of records at a time, one PDF at a time over time.
How do
So
we
they
bring
have-
them in?
I was gonna say, so they should be PDFs, not,
Yeah,
Like-
there's more instruction. We ask people to
Oh,
do
the
some.
instructions are there?
Yeah, the instructions are there, and we ask people to do special things. Give them meaningful titles, like name of church, location of church, session minutes, and then date range, stuff like that. And the records retention schedule is not there. Some things have changed recently. Sorry. There we go. Home services, records management, congregations and mid-councils. There's a retention schedule. Okay. And that goes all the way down. Every conceivable variety of financial record that has ever been made has a year limit assigned to it. All right. Yeah.
So I'm looking at the part that talks about not registers and not session, meeting minutes, but pictures and things like that. Is there, how is that, how do you label that? There's a variety of different things. Do you have to try to put that in some sort of order before it goes? What's best for you receiving some of that?
I think with both with both mediated and non-mediated photographs, the most important task is appraisal, like at the very beginning of the presentation.
Okay.
In broad terms, we privilege photographs based on their age, more or less. Just because it becomes very easy over the course of the 20th, 21st century to make way more photographs than you need, right? 19th century photographs are very rare. And so if you have like a church cornerstone laying panoramic image of women of the church from the early 19th century, or from like early 20th century, we think of those as very valuable. 11 billion photographs of the same church picnic in 1990. You're going to want to select out a few of the best ones.
Okay. All right.
And ditto for anything that's born digital. You want to do a little bit of selection.
Okay.
We have not been open to born digital deposits for very long, and so there's a kind of negotiating process that we haven't worked out. We haven't worked out, how much time you should spend trying to identify every single person in every single photograph. I think that could be like unnecessarily onerous. And personally, I like description of things in the aggregate, like description of groups. Like, here are 10 photographs of youth activities in the church from 2000 to 2020. Definitely not the names of every single youth, because that presents its own problems.
And so that could be, if you had a group of photographs from the 1940s at the church, they could go together in like one folder and be labeled that way, and that would be okay for what you
Yeah, I think wherever possible, describe in the aggregate. Especially, I mean, if you have a fairly small amount of material, you could just say, these are photos from this church. Go with God.
Okay.
That'd be fine. Especially if it's small. The bigger the amount, kind of the more description is useful, right?
Okay.
Right on. Why don't we take 5 for a bite of water, and I'll turn off the television, and then we can do show and tell, cooking time. Yeah, it's a lot. Okay, what do we have?
So for Glenna, who came in late, this is the stuff from Emmanuel. You probably recognize many of these boxes because you were on that AZ. So this is some of the stuff that I was going to have to look through, and now David is going to show us how I should do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's right. No, that's the God's truth. Start with the easy stuff. Okay, I need. If I was doing this for real, I would be going through and identifying every volume by the kind of thing it is, and then giving it a date range. So I flip through every volume, look for the first entry, the last entry, and say session minutes. This is helpfully labeled 1897 to 1932. Sometimes the labels are wrong. No offense, but that's why I look at every single volume.
You have a big truck?
Do I have a big truck with me?
Today, yeah.
Oh, I have a smallish SUV. If anybody in the church wants to fundraise and get us like a Dodge Sprinter that I can drive around the East Coast,
Pick up our books?
pick up everything, I'll do that. I'm about to do that in North and South Carolina, because Charlotte Presbytery and New Harmony are really like the centers of African American Presbyterianism, and I just want to go door to door down there. Okay, so let's see. What I usually do is build piles of like things. This is a minute book. These are deposit tickets.
Shred.
Thank you. That was Spider. Those are deposit tickets. And these are deposit tickets. So usually, honestly, when I'm set up at work, I have table at work, I have the archives box, and I have a shred box. I had a shred box, those will go.
But you would check every single sheet in those folders.
No, ma'am.
No, what if there's the incorporation document?
Well, I mean, work. That's fine. One thing that I wanted, there's a couple of things I can point out about this kind of thing. This is a session minute volume, 1897 or 1932, so the better part of 35 years of text. And even though it's in longhand, and even though the spine is busted, that's a pretty information dense piece of paper. And this is, how old are you? 11 to 14 in reverse chronological order, and it's thicker than the 35-year volume. This is, I'm not trying to diss any clerk of session or anybody who's present. This is a function of the 21st century. It is really easy to make a bunch of information. The book of order describes the kinds of things that should go into minutes, like that must go into minutes. And typically, minutes are moved, seconded, and approved. And the more verbose the text, more verbose texts are not always better. Right? And stuff that you jam in that's extra is not always better. Okay, so this is obviously old, obviously fresh. Right? This is actually the Register, 1887. Okay. Oh, that's interesting. This is marriage certificates, but also some commemorative stuff. I mean, if you all promise to return this to the front. So this is what I mean by like commemorative publications. There are yearbooks.
We don't need to keep extra paper.
You'll give enough at our.
Minutes, records. Marriage certificates, certificates of transfer, certificates of baptism. We keep those if there's not a register for that time period. If there's a register, the register is the item of record, and you keep that. If I find a 20th century-ish register in here, these become shreddable. If I don't find a 20th century register, then these are keepable. Anniversary. That is recent minutes. That is recent minutes. That is a that is a when register. Register this service. Yeah. Oh, very much so. So this is a register. It's not from the same time period as the marriage certificates, so we're looking for a late 20th century register before I can shred this.
You get caught up reading these things?
No. It's not possible. It's not an option for me. That is recent.
He has to draw the line. He cannot.
No, I mean, that's part of archival description. We describe what things are and when they're from. We don't do like what they're about or what their meaning is. That, we mostly leave that to other people. 90s. 80s, 90s. 30s, 40s. 30s, 40s. Early minutes, late minutes. These look like minute books, but what are they really?
Oh, wow.
Okay, so that's your ledger. That's your account ledger. These, even though they're old, we treat this kind of material, like a big book of pledges and expenses, as a temporary financial record. You don't keep it forever. This would be the kind of thing that you look at the retention schedule, and so long as you're meeting your legal requirements, your legal reporting, this kind of thing can also be shredded.
Several hearts are breaking around the table.
Well, I mean,
The information in line, like if you're looking at the budget and so on, is already in the minutes.
Right.
this is worth remembering, like the top line is going to be reported out in an annual congregation meeting. And significant actions are going to be voted on by session. So, like, the record of the financial picture of the church is represented in minutes. Like, we rely on that. And also, what we're trying to do, I mean, at least in my institution, is we're trying to make sure that the very good stuff is more easily recognizable. You know, we're doing a quick sort so that the most important stuff looks most important and is legible to users when we describe it. Okay, you can go.
So those are all ledgers?
Yes. So,
If they got audited, that would be great, right?
there's no auditor that's going to go back to the 1950s from the president.
No, but at the time when they did them.
Oh, absolutely.
They were
Yeah.
Yes, we're not saying get rid of your current one.
Right, yeah, I know.
Oh, look
I
at
know.
that. Okay, this is why you know, open up books. This is the Dorcas Society, so one of the women's groups of the church.
I
I was just wondering.
Also PW. Oh, no, I'm sorry, Dorcas. The 70s. Dorcas. Another ledger. Oh, that is the checkbook.
Is there money in it?
Madam Clerk, do you need this?
I think we need that until the church closes officially. Thank you.
Okay.
Like I said, that was all the stuff, so we just brought it all up and
Yep. Okay.
I will put that back in safekeeping.
why don't you tell
The
them
deeds are
what
probably
the-
in there somewhere too, which I also need back.
Did we, I put those in a folder. We did that yesterday, right?
I think they came up here to show them.
Oh, right. This? Those.
And I'm not sure we
That.
caught what those small books contain.
It's a women's society, the Dorcas group.
I think they're the minutes.
Yes, they're minutes and not financial registers of that organization.
Phone number, yep.
Okay. So, daily business correspondence of the church, and also a church newsletter. That's gonna be part of like the commemorative batch of records of the church. Brought up property records of the church. Presbytery has not divested itself of the property yet, is that right?
Correct.
Correct.
So, in a situation like this, and I guess this
You
is.
need that.
Yeah, you need that. This is a title, anything that documents like the physical plant of the property, chain of ownership. Presbytery definitely needs to keep that until they have finished their transaction. And then after that, you'll see this in our retention schedule for mid-councils, we keep records of property transactions for 20 years afterward. The kinds of property records that we maintain permanently tend to describe the physical shape of the building. So, you know, architectural records, so architects' drawings, blueprints, and then plats. So the flat layout of church property, like maps, those we also think of as permanent. But Other than that, the kind of like more financial transactional stuff is really to be kept by the Presbyterian until the property is dealt with. That was financial. Yes. That was daily business. You look like more minutes. Let's get y'all out of here.
Wow, look at all that.
If you start piling them up.
I never resigned.
Did I hear a clerk say they were going to resign?
No, not
That's unfortunate. I think the first training I did in Philly Presbytery, I had a clerk at the circle say, "Yep, I've been clerk for about 40 years." When I got elected, they said it was a life sentence.
But I'm living proof that it's not a lifetime.
Right. Okay. So
I
this
don't know,
is
you just moved from local to.
That's right.
Yeah, it is like.
so this is a contemporary church register. It goes from 1962 to 2016, and my certificates of baptism are from 89 to 93. And so that means that my certificates become shreddable material. We have the item of record there.
Oh, okay.
That's interesting. This thing, this is a memorial book, right? This is a record of gifts of stuff and gifts of money to the church. This is permanent.
That's permanent.
Yeah. Just in the style of it's part of like the commemorative records. Okay.
Oh, right.
Those are session minutes. These are getting precarious. Sorry, everyone.
Do you want this cart back in?
Yeah.
I may just move my stuff a little. Don't
Okay.
worry. So this is like the great secret of doing archival description. You just make a bunch of piles.
And you keep making them until they get smaller and smaller.
From one pile to the other.
It's like my kitchen table. I tell
Oh.
them, don't touch that pile. I know what it is.
I know what it is.
Well, and he's doing the great art of pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it down. Don't like get lost in reading it for hours, you know? Like pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it down.
Those are more session minutes. These are trustees. Trustees minutes. Trustees, Dorcas, others. Okay.
So the trustees don't go with the society.
I'm sorry?
You put the trustees in a separate pile.
Yeah, because if I was going to do accessioning, the way that I would describe the records would start with session minutes, earliest to latest, registers, earliest to latest, and then organizations of the church. So women earliest to latest, trustees earliest to
Okay.
latest, just so they're all in one place. That
That's down there,
is
yeah.
the
The
congregation.
organist is here, but it's more
Congregation.
Be the
And that is session. Okay. Getting close, and we're also coming up on news.
Do we have to have permission from sessions to send our record?
Great question. If you're clerk, you're the constitutional authority. I'm not.
I told you guys how
You
important
guys
you
have a lot of
are.
power.
We only have 3 elders, so.
I would tell them
Right.
Yeah.
that you have done this, so it's in the minutes.
Right.
I didn't know if it had to be pre-approved before, which is why I didn't bring anything with me.
You are the keeper of the records. If you deem that the best place for them, because like Emmanuel could have sent many of those a long time ago to the Historical Society, you know, to keep them safe. you as keeper of the records can deem that that is the best place for them to be, and then report to session. That is what you did.
Yeah, in my experience, like not as a clerk, I guess there are different dynamics depending on how your session is. You know, you have a rambunctious session, you probably want them to vote on it.
You don't wanna know our church.
Yeah, all right.
We're federated,
Fair enough.
so.
I'm gonna walk away.
But most of you have heard this spiel before from me, but the bottom line is, you are the most important officer of the church. And in fact, the only officer that's technically required of a church is the clerk of session. You have other officers, you could have other officers, but you have to have a clerk of session. You people are a very important part of the church.
That would have made it more attractive if you were volunteer. I have more property records. So those are the that Presbyterian wants to keep. There's a property appraisal, there's abstract of title, I think there's an article of incorporation. And I don't know what that is yet. It says vellum church drawings. I mean like architect's vellum, like 20th century. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, okay, so, yeah. I mean, in the event that Presbytery does not need architectural renderings to like deal with ownership of property, we would bring them in. Okay. That's the bat, actually, sorry.
So what would you do if they show up in your worship?
Keep them flat. If they're, sometimes we get material in that's rolled, and so what we have to do, if it's, what we basically do is we humidify and flatten. So I have like some very big Tupperware containers, and you fill like an inch of water at the bottom that's, I like it warm, and then put a Tupperware container for the stuff to sit on, put your rolled item in there, and then close it and walk away for a couple of weeks. And the rolled item, and you could do this with rolled photographs, like an old panoramic photograph, but it takes up water. You have to monitor it to make sure that you're not creating mold, which I've also done. Sorry. So make sure that it does not take up so much water that it molds. But then, once it's been humidified, you lay it between two sheets of blotter paper and put it under some kind of heavy enough weight to keep it flat. Then you let it sit for months. And as the water slowly evaporates out of the paper while it's under pressure, all the fibers relax again and become flat. That is at-home paper flattening.
Yeah. Would you digitize something like that?
If somebody asked, yeah.
No
Give
way.
a donation, they'll-
Yeah, big donation, right? Ooh, work.
Okay. That's documentation of the Muzak system. That's how the dishwasher works.
Shred.
Yeah.
That's how the church boiler works. That's cool. Oh, little certificate from Heifer International. So, where is he going with that? No! I think that is in the ballpark of commemorative material. We tend not to preserve plaques, for example. You can really rack up a bunch of plaques in churches. And we really have to dedicate our space to the documentary history rather than like accoutrements.
Now, those certificates from Heifer come like every year. If you had a whole bunch of them, would you just say one as a representation of all those?
I'm honestly not sure, but I probably would sample it, especially if we're dealing with a dissolved congregation, and there's less of a likelihood that anybody right now is gonna be offended or come and harass me. So by the same token, active congregations, if you're depositing material and you have stuff that is just like for you in a gray zone, like I think this is permanent, I'm gonna send it. When I do accessioning, like there are moments where I'll be like, okay, this actually is not permanent, and I always offer to send that back to the congregation. If you think it's valuable to you, please keep it. I can't hold on to it, but I always check in with congregations. You're still the owners of this stuff, so I have to respect that. Naturally, I got the trickiest stuff last. Not obvious stuff. Oh, newsletters. Okay, great. A small selection of newsletters. Not every single one that ever went out over the whole history of time, but a small selection of newsletters is awesome.
Yes.
Oh, that's cool. This worked out especially well because this is old propaganda from my shop. Church records to deposit in this that can be shredded. I've seen that a million times.
Somebody said we need to do this someday.
So what about paper clips and staples?
So staples are not going to. So our practice when dealing with, and we usually encounter this with old national agency records when we finally process a big collection of the bureaucracy. We pull big metal, so any big paper clips we pull and discard, but it's just beyond, like the level of care to remove staples is just beyond what they're worth. Staples
Well, I
don't.
mean as a practice for us.
For you? I mean, anything permanent, just avoid using metal of any kind.
It's got staples.
Yeah, the biggest enemies are Post-it notes, Scotch tape, and metal. Okay. That is an old building contract. That's that again. Temporary financials. Sound system. Okay, great. 1968. So. Those. Okay. So, we have all of the permanent stuff over here, all of the temporary stuff over here, there's stuff from Presbytery right there. And that was longer than I thought it was.
That's because we asked.
That's because we interrupted.
No, it's great. I'm gonna have to deal with that shortly. All right, good. That's pretty much in line with my throughput on records that get accession. I run at about 2 cubic feet an hour.
So then
That would mean like me typing into a computer and stuff.
you hand them off to the next person.
No. What would really happen if I was doing this for real is I would have been writing down every entry that I would make, and then I would go and type them into the database.
Right. But
I'm not doing that right.
Physical property, you would hand off to the next person
The
to put it on the shelf? Or
No, I put that on the shelf.
Oh, you do all that?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
There's a next person.
I thought you were just intake. I didn't know you were a shelf.
Yeah. Yeah, no. Wow. You have a higher estimation of my value to the institution. Okay. Those are big and wide, so I can't keep them flat. Oh yeah, the last thing, and Becky wanted me to mention this. Another thing we can learn from this item is, and other folks have mentioned it, and I mentioned it in person to one of y'all. I love the Cokesbury binder. There's nothing in the Book of Order that says you have to use Cokesbury products. It's not part of Presbyterian law. And they're expensive to replace, right? That binder is like $200 and the refills are like $50. If you're going to maintain paper records, in addition to the PDFs that you generate at the end of the year, use acid-free paper. Keep it in something that is not a vinyl binder. Those are the only two recommendations that I have for you. What vinyl does over really the near term, and all of you know this if you've ever like emptied out an old office anywhere, is laser toner. So laser toner, whoops, all right, like on here, carries in it a little bit of solvent. That's what makes the toner layer turn liquid, and then when it's heated, it sets. Like laser printing is basically a tiny layer of plastic embedded with like carbon. And that toner, the toner solvent, is actually a solvent of PVC, which is polyvinyl chloride. And so what happens over time is that solvent merges with the vinyl and makes everything sticky, right? And you'll see like a sticky transfer from one page to the inside. You've probably seen that before. So that's why we avoid vinyl. If, you know, you can find cloth binders a little bit still. Cokesbury's are okay, especially because they're, the inside is acid-free up against acid-free. And if you absolutely have no options at all and really want a 3-ring binder, just put a couple of sheets, 3, 4, 5 sheets of acid-free paper that are blank in between the text block and the vinyl to kind of like mitigate that sticky thing.
Is it better if we use laser printer or inkjet?
A little bit, not really. What everybody has access to is laser printers, right? By and large. For like fine art, you know, artists who do like prints off of digital media have like high-end inkjets with soy-based ink, and they print to linen paper. And for the very long term, that's much more sound. But laser toner is basically fine. The thing that's going to help you the most is printing to acid-free paper. Because acidic paper will deteriorate. Like if you've seen a newspaper that's been left in the sun, or you know, a pocket paperback, like acid-free paper will deteriorate pretty fast.
So you haven't talked about newspaper clippings as commemorative?
Yeah, I haven't really. And we were talking earlier about PW, right? Because Presbyterian women, very often the PW groups very frequently keep like a minutes book, just like Session or just like anybody else. They also very frequently keep, as the record of their work, a PW scrapbook. There could be like clippings, photographs, flyers from their events and stuff. We think of scrapbooks as permanent, like the commemorative stuff from the church. News clippings, again, just like with photographs, news clippings are everywhere. They can be useful as like single issue guides, right? It's like a guide to the life of the church. But you can easily be overwhelmed by them. Just like photographs or worship services or anything else, select the most important stuff and keep that. Newsprint obviously degrades over time, right? One approach to preserving newsprint would be selectively like taking the best ones and scanning them and saving them to PDF. You can also do preservation photocopying, which is photocopying the clipping onto acid-free paper. Those are ways to mitigate, some of the decay. Yeah. That was my show and tell.
Well, thank you so much to David Staniunas for all of your help with that. Loads of information. I'm going to be, I'm sure, sharing that information for years to come with various people when, people ask me what do I do with this stuff, or an AC comes to close a church, or, any of those things. So thank you so much for all that information and for sharing that with us.